Just 3 days before Mojang added villager trading, the villagers traded rubies. And this version of the villager that looked like Steve existed unused in the code for 2 years. And these are the 73 major features that Mojang removed from Minecraft, and why they're gone forever. Starting with Steve's hair. And no, he didn't go bald, but originally Steve was supposed to have a hair layer on the texture. And while this extra hair layer existed on September 1st of 2009, it was then removed on October 27th of that same year. And then on December 23rd, Notch removed the ability for creepers to melee, since originally creepers would deal about 4 HP of damage when they'd hit you, and then only explode on death. But in later versions of InDev, it was made so that creepers would explode behind us, dealing damage the way that we see today. And that's not the only change to explosives that we got, since back in Minecraft Classic, it used to be that you could defuse TNT by punching it. But fortunately for us, and unfortunately for those who explode, this was then removed in InDev. The first feature removed in 2010 was the arrow indicator. Since back in the survival tests of Minecraft, there used to be arrows that were displayed as a number above the hotbar, but it didn't really look like a permanent feature. It was definitely something meant for debug testing, and so it was removed. And just a week later, we saw another change to our arrows, since originally you used to be able to craft arrows using just an apple. Now, I don't think the idea was that we would use the core to shoot at our friends, but instead this existed as a test recipe to allow us to see how crafting would work in the game. And instead we go on to craft our arrows, but using iron ingots instead. Another feature set to change. In that same update, one of the other changes to crafting is that we used to be able to open up the crafting grid by pressing the B button. And to show just how short-lived that was, it was added and removed in the same day. Score is one of the more confusing things that we still have in Minecraft, since getting a high score just means that you got a lot of XP points at this point in the game. But originally our score used to show in the upper corner of the screen, and so instead of seeing it on death, you'd see it all the time. I mean, it seemed like a much more important part of the game than it was ever meant to be. And more confusing numbers to keep track of were our stats that used to show in the inventory screen. In early versions of the game, before we had crafting added in the 2x2 grid, we would instead see our stats for attack, defense, and speed. But the game never became this much of an RPG, and they never actually had any purpose. On February 6th of 2010, we lost studded armor from the game. Now, it wasn't a big loss, it was never actually functional, and it was only added to the player's inventory when you loaded up a world, just giving you a functionless item. But the idea was that it was a modified version of our cloth armor that existed at the time, which itself would later be changed into leather armor instead of wool. Before Minecraft got the world generation that we see today, we used to have the ability to take isometric screenshots. So if you pressed F7, you could see the islands that generated in Minecraft from this top level view. But on February 27th of 2010, this was removed in favor of the level previewer. And in that same update, we'd also lose the starter house, which was the earliest structure ever added in Minecraft. Makes sense, it was the first structure ever removed too. And technically, there were versions of the starter house that were removed as well. Since we could see this version here that's made out of oak planks and stone, originally it was just a mossy cobblestone box. And if you look up into the sky in the old versions, you notice that originally, the Minecraft sky used to change colors depending on what world type we had. And so if you booted up something like the hell biome type, you would see a red sky go over the island. But in that same InfDev update, it was all removed. No more fog, cloud, or sky color customization. If you wanted to find 0, back in InfDev, one of the easiest ways was to follow the obsidian walls, which were these primitive structures that would generate going off in each direction with an intersection spawning at 0. And then we could follow these walls along the quadrants, eventually leading us to the brick pyramid, which is good because the brick pyramids were actually one of the rarest structures that we could find back in old Minecraft, but they also didn't really have much of a point for finding them. It was just a solid structure of bricks that generated up to the build height. And as much as they extended up into the sky, they also extended down into the ground, proving that even if you hollowed out the brick pyramid, there wasn't much to see inside. On June 24th of 2010, the liquid spawners were removed from InfDev. And what were liquid spawners? Well, originally, the ways that water and lava would regenerate back in the game were that there were these spawner blocks that were special blocks that generated liquids around them. They're really just like mob spawners work nowadays. Just picture a water farm instead of a skeleton one. And Notch's original idea for the game, we would have been using gears for our mechanisms instead of redstone. But when redstone was added in alpha version 1.0.1, our gears were removed as well. And nowadays, we wouldn't be likely to see anything like this in the game because it's too mechanical for Minecraft's current vision. Do you know coral was added to Minecraft years before the update Aquatic? Original versions of coral were dating back all the way in alpha, but they were only found in the terrain.png file that existed within the game's code. And eventually they would be replaced by a snowy grass side texture that we see here. Before alpha version 1.0.9, whenever you'd see a player walk around, they'd always have this silly walking animation. It's hard to miss. You can see it in a lot of the old footage. But on July 21st of 2010, it was changed to the more standard walking animation that we see now in the game. And then later that year on September 18th of 2010, the level previewer was removed from the game, which the original idea here was that there was an overhead rendering of the Minecraft world that you could see to visualize the game. It somewhat makes sense that during InfDev we'd have an infinite map visualizer. Before biomes were ever properly implemented into Minecraft, we lost this one, which is that when you were exploring the world back in old versions of Alpha, you could find this randomly generated part of the map called Winter Mode, which would generate snow and ice across the Minecraft landscape. But a Winter Wonderland this was not. It even decreased the rate of passive mob spawns when you walked around here. And so when the game got proper biomes added in, this was removed. And speaking of world generation, we have to talk about monoliths, which were removed in the same version, but they were a lot harder to miss when they did happen. Since what would happen here is we'd have giant chunks of the terrain that would generate above ground, causing these huge holes in the map underneath them, and giant cliff faces stretching up into the build limit. And while these were removed naturally from the game back in alpha version 1.2, you could get this to generate by using a custom world feature and defining the biome scale weight value at a negative integer. When nether portals were first added to Minecraft, they had the ability to spawn one by pressing down the F4 key. Well, that was just a debug feature that accidentally made it into a proper release. And so it was removed later that same day with version 1.2.2b. It's probably the only thing faster than a speedrunner portal. When Minecraft finally entered beta with 1.0 on December 20th of 2010, we did lose with it cloth blocks, which is the original name for wool that we used to get by punching sheep. And we would use this to craft up our cloth armor. But that was then replaced with leather armor and used the same texture. The first April Fool's joke that Mojang added to Minecraft was the locked chest. And these were part of a prank where you had to go to the Minecraft website to purchase keys so that you could open them up. It's all a joke about in-game purchases. Well, those would later come to Minecraft, it wasn't here. But funnily, even though this was added as an April Fool's prank, they weren't actually removed from the game until April 5th of 2011. Prior to beta 1.6, fire was one of the most destructive blocks in Minecraft, because just within a few seconds, it would spread so far that you would basically not be able to put it out with a water bucket. But ever since May 26th of 2011, this has been changed to be the more tamer system that we're familiar with today, which thankfully means that these above ground lava pools aren't exactly a death sentence anymore. If you wanted to get seeds in early beta, you would have to till the soil with a hoe on grass blocks. But since we now had short grass added to the game, you could just break this and have chances of getting seeds. And now we'd only have to till the soil to plant down the seeds that we got. And as we talked about earlier, you used to be able to punch sheep to get to shear their wool, but now it was just made so that we actually had to use shears instead. I mean, you could punch sheep to get their wool, but you weren't exactly gonna have a sheep left. One of the biggest changes to come to Minecraft at this point is that we can no longer use food to heal up, at least not directly. Since now beta 1.8 pre-release 1 added in the hunger bar, meaning we'd have to fill up on saturation before we could actually heal back our hearts. Before you would just eat food whenever your health got low, and it would fill you right back up. But also food couldn't stack, so there really was a trade-off there anyway. And speaking of trade-offs, one of the other big things that we lost in this update was the farlands. Since this beta 1.8 update was the one that fixed the 32-bit overflow. And now the noise functions function properly and didn't spawn the farlands at the edge of the map. And so if you see someone walking back to the farlands in the game, they're usually doing it on a beta 1.7.3, the oldest version where they still exist. And just a few days after we lost the farlands, we lost other biomes as well. Those being the rainforest, the seasonal forest, the regular forest, swampland, savanna, shrubland, taiga, desert, plains, tundra, sky, and ice desert. Now, when I say those all out loud, it seems like some of them are still in the game, right? Well, the names would be used again, but they don't look anything like how we see them in the game currently. For example, this is the pre-1.8 savanna, and here's the savanna we know today. If you were to pirate Minecraft prior to beta 1.8 and log into the game, then it would always be obvious that you were playing on an unlicensed copy. Since at the top of the screen it would say unlicensed copy, frowny face, or logged in from another location. Either way, purchase at minecraft.net. But in beta 1.8, this was changed, making it less annoying to log in from another location, or whatever else you scalawags had in mind. In beta 1.9, the haste potions were removed from the game, because during a brief time from 1.8, Mojang added in all of the potion effects, but they weren't accessible within the gameplay. And so while developing 1.9, they added in haste potions that were craftable, but by pre-release 3, they were properly removed from the game. And we wouldn't see haste return until beacons joined the game in 1.4.2. Before Mojang properly released Minecraft in November of 2011, they still had one structure left to remove from beta, that being these glass pillars. So to call them a structure, kind of a stretch. They didn't generate with a structure, they were a part of the stronghold so that the team could go and find them before they had the Eyes of Ender, but they were never meant to make it into a proper build. And with the full version release of Minecraft, we lost one critical feature: this sound. Ooh. It's wild to think that this didn't even exist in proper versions of the game, especially given how iconic it is to us old players. It was on November 13th of 2011 that they replaced the old hurt sound with one that didn't actually have a player's voice. And this is also the update where we lost the old explosion sound that you can hear here, switching instead to this one. And we also lost the old arrow sound, now sounding like this instead. Which that one was especially iconic given how many times we could shoot off arrows rapid fire with the old bows. Yet another removed feature. And to punctuate the fact that Minecraft is finally in its release candidate, this is also the time that they lost the on-screen version number, which I will say was never always a feature of Minecraft beta. There was a brief time during beta 1.6.5 to beta 1.7.3 where they didn't use this feature, but for a lot of Minecraft's early history, this is iconic. And for it to go away was a sign of the game growing up. And growing got a whole lot easier now that walking no longer tramples farmland. Since before 1.1, anytime that you would walk over farmland or crops, it would always trample it. But thankfully, since January 12th of 2012, we now have to land on top of it to actually make it happen. That's a lot less annoying. As an Easter egg, back when Notch was actively working on the game's development, anytime that a player with the name Notch was killed, they would drop an extra apple in addition to their inventory. But as of 1.3.1 in August 1st of 2012, this was removed. So if you see Notch drop an apple since then, it's circumstance. In the past, if you wanted to break down a door, you're gonna have to open it in the process. Since in the past, we used to be able to punch our doors to open them up, in addition to using the right click. But it was really annoying to get rid of the doors. Despite popular belief, footprints were never actually added in Minecraft, but they did exist within the game. Since originally back in the terrain.png texture, you could find within that texture atlas an unused footprint texture inside of the game. But after the terrain.png was removed, our footprints went along with it, never actually making it into the full game, except as an Easter egg that you could find within the Infinite update for April Fools. The first time that saddles were craftable, they were originally just horse saddles. And the original idea was that we would craft up separate horse saddles instead to be used alongside our pig saddles. But it was too confusing to have two different items, so these were then removed. On June 13th of 2013, Mojang removed texture packs from the game. But this was to make way for the much more favorable resource packs, which even though they're more complex to set up, they allowed us to do a lot more, changing out different resources within the game, such as models and sound effects. And nowadays with data packs make it even easier to modify the game just within vanilla. All the way back in beta 1.9, they added in a villager texture that resembled Steve, making it seem like the original villagers looked a lot closer to us than they ever do today. But again, this texture was actually never used. And so when we swapped out for resource packs instead of texture packs, this old texture went along with it. If you were to die back before 1.6.1, in multiplayer it would always look like the player was jumping upwards before they disappeared. But ever since 1.6.1, it's now been changed to the modern animation where they fall to the side when they die, which now is the universal symbol of death in Minecraft. Just look at YouTube thumbnails. On October 25th of 2013, we had another biome purge from Minecraft, those being the mountain edge and the frozen ocean. And while those were removed from the game generation back in 1.7.2, they weren't fully removed from the game's code until 1.18. Snapshot 14W25A made a big change to fire, since this was the update that removed the item form of fire from the game, which up until this point also was used as the recipe for chainmail armor. So as such, we can no longer craft up the armor. Even though we have chains in the game, it still isn't craftable anyway. If you used to go below Y level 16, you'd find this void fog that would clog up your vision, which added a great atmosphere to the lower depths of the game. But on August 19th of 2014, it was removed so that there was better building clarity. Also a lot less creepypasta material. And speaking of creepy, there was a big change to our creepers. Since for a brief time in 1.8, other mobs had the ability to run away from a nearby exploding creeper. But very quickly, Mojang realized that this is a bad idea, since the way they implemented it originally checked for an exploding creeper every single tick, making the game a lot laggier. The first notable feature removed from Pocket Edition was the Nether Reactor core, or rather its functionality, since while it's still obtainable as a full non-functional block, originally we used to be able to craft this up and generate over to the Nether inside of the game. But when the Nether was properly added into Pocket Edition, there was no point to have another spire like this anyway. The quiver existed within Minecraft's code for years, even though it was never properly implemented, and the idea dating back to in-dev was that this would allow us to hold all of our extra arrows. But what's weird is before they were actually removed on July 29th of 2015, Dinnerbone had actually mentioned that they were planning on removing it. I mean, all of Dinnerbone's other tweets across the years before were just another experiment that had gone to the wayside. This is the super secret settings, which despite their name were actually a button that we could easily find within the options menu. And whenever you pressed it, it would enable different post-processing shaders within vanilla Minecraft. A lot of these are frankly unusable, but the idea of having built-in shaders within the game was pretty cool. But unfortunately, it was removed in Snapshot 15W31A. In 1.7.4, Mojang added Twitch integration to Minecraft, which allowed you to stream your gameplay directly through Minecraft without needing something else like OBS. But in the snapshots for 1.9, it was fully removed. Though I did love the feature of having Twitch chat appear in-game like a regular multiplayer chat message. There are mods that do the same thing, but I think this original implementation was pretty fun. And now that we're in the combat snapshots, we also lost sword blocking here, which originally would help us block about 50% of the damage, but now that we had shield blocking added to the game, it was no longer needed. Also in 2015, we saw this odd structure removed from the game, which is that during development, when they were making the dragon fight changes, you used to be able to respawn the Ender Dragon by building a creeper face made out of clay. And this existed in the game since Snapshot 15W31A until Snapshot 15W44A. I don't think it was ever intended that we would use a creeper face. I'm just amazed it existed within the game for this long. But since we had the End Crystal ritual added into this version, there was no need to keep around the debug method. And also at this time, we lost the enchanted golden apple crafting recipe. Since while they used to be craftable using full golden blocks, they now were made into exclusively a treasure item, making them a lot more rare and making it a lot harder to get the thing banner pattern. When beta 1.9 was testing out different potion variants, they left a lot of them still in the code. So up until 2015, you had the chance to get 32 different potion variants, just not in survival. But at this point, they were fully removed removed in snapshot 15W44B. And the original idea here was that they were supposed to be part of a system where you could mix together different potions within cauldrons. We still don't have potion cauldrons on Java, so that whole system is scrapped. Before November 2nd of 2015, whenever you placed on a powered rail back in Bedrock Edition early versions, it was permanently powered in Pocket Edition, making our powered rails a lot more powerful, almost worth the expense. When the stonecutter was first added to Minecraft, it was added to Bedrock Edition exclusively as this block, very different from the stonecutter that we see today. And while it was also used to craft up our stone-related items, when normal crafting was fully implemented into Pocket Edition, the block was removed, at least in its functionality, but it was still obtainable using admin powers. Boats used to be one of the worst ways to travel in Minecraft. They were super fragile, so anytime that you would try to go ride one of these through a swamp, any lily pad would break it. Steering was slow, ice boats were slow, it was just not great. And so when our boats finally got a rework, they also became a lot less fragile, making it a lot easier for us to go and sail the open seas. If you're familiar with removed features from Minecraft, you're probably expecting me to mention the mob and the monster mobs from the game, which were these early entities that existed within the code back in dev and classic versions of the game. And yeah, they're super old and they haven't been used for years, so it's crazy that they existed within the game until August 10th of 2016, making one of Minecraft's most famous removed features into one of the longest standing as well. Back in 1.10.2, there used to be a bug with minecarts where we could get their entity name and not just the item name. So if you wanted a rare item, you could technically obtain something named entity.minecartfurnace.name, which was marked as a bug in the bug tracker. It wasn't fully removed until the snapshots for 1.11. On March 30th of 2017, achievements were finally replaced with advancements, which carried over a lot of the same progression, but it also meant that iconic achievements like getting wood no longer exist within the game. Probably for the best for the all ages audience that the game had by this point. And these advancements now allowed us to have data pack customization as well, allowing for something like this crazy pack where it adds in over 1,000 new advancements into Minecraft. If I say the name snapshot 17W47A, it probably doesn't sound that familiar, because a lot of players know it better as the flattening, which is the idea that Minecraft's ID system changed over to a namespace ID system instead of the numbered IDs, which meant that we could no longer attain a bunch of different versions of blocks that we used to be able to. Like prior to this, we used to be able to get full water blocks inside of the game, or rare things like this 6-sided wood block originally existed because of the ID system, but we wouldn't see it get added back into the game until they added in the wood block instead of the log blocks that we now have. Before we had dead bushes in the game, they were originally called shrubs, which were visually identical to the dead bushes that we see today, but their functionality was a lot closer to grass or flowers. And if you broke them back then, you'd have a chance of getting seeds instead of the sticks that we have today. On February 9th of 2018, the customized world menu was removed from Minecraft, because for a period between 1.8 to 1.13, when you were generating your world, you used to be able to choose the customized world type option, which was like an expanded version of what we see in super flat options, allowing us more particular control over everything that generated within the world. But this was then removed, only to come back on a data pack only format in 1.16. As part of the Caves and Cliffs update that we got in 1.18, we lost again several more biomes from the game. And while there's too many to list out, one of the most notable losses would be the modified jungle edge, which isn't visually the most interesting biome, but it was the rarest in the game to this point, even rarer than the mushroom fields biome. Did you know that originally you used to be able to encounter ravagers as part of pillager patrols? Well, thankfully it was only existing within the snapshots, added in 18W43A, but removed 3 snapshots later. And instead the ravagers would be added back in the next snapshot with the introduction of raiding. On December 12th of 2018, all of the old villages were removed. Since prior to this, some of the villages still had their old look in the desert and taiga biomes, but now they all have the new standard look that we saw introduced in the Village and Pillage update. In snapshot 19W06A, we lost the angry villager from the game, or rather this particle texture that hinted at one, since this was added all the way back in August 23rd of 2012, but it was never actually used in the game, and likely this would have showed when you made a villager angry instead of the actual anger clouds we see within the game. While Vindicators used to be part of our pillager patrols, in the 1.14.3 pre-release 2, they were finally removed, which made it a lot safer for us because these mobs can deal 19 points of damage in a single hit. For reference, our health bar is 20, so it was a little too deadly to come across one of these when you didn't actually want to start the raid, and so they were removed even after 1.14's release. Rubies were the original idea for emeralds, and while they were added back in the game all the way back in 2012, they weren't actually fully removed until March 31st of 2021. Even though Mojang decided to go with emeralds because of Dinnerbone's red-green color blindness, their textures still existed dormant within the game's code, even after the texture update and the flattening. Makes you wonder if there was some kind of idea to bring these back at any point, but with their removal, I'm guessing that's changed. The copper horn was intended to be a new musical instrument that we could play during the game, and unlike our regular horns, we could look around in different directions to change the pitch and how we wanted to play this. And while they made it as far as the Bedrock Edition previews, they never actually were added to the full game, eventually being removed, not even joining into Java. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?